Until recently, Canada's economy seemed to be firing on all cylinders. Real estate markets were up, job creation was up, but until you start looking behind the scenes, under the hood, you start to realize that the economy is not very strong at all. Over the last several decades, Canada's economy has relied on government stimulus in order to make it work. Much of Canada's economy is real estate dependent and on the other peripheral jobs that come along with it. Construction, development, even to a point of municipal bureaucracy is dependent on this real estate game. What Canada's economy has seemed to forget is that the economy can't rely long-term on government stimulus. We've seen this in Vancouver in the real estate market, where properties have dropped 35 to 40% in some areas, and the condo market in Toronto looks abysmal. A real thriving economy can never last long-term on government stimulus, as I just said. What does drive an economy long-term and sustainably is real savings, innovation, investment, and entrepreneurial growth. Even with this real estate market crash, Toronto and Vancouver real estate prices still look jaw-dropping, and a lot of the wealth is tied up in expensive real estate. And that's, I guess, the exact problem, is that these wealthy individuals who are real estate rich and cash poor aren't driving the economy. They aren't creating jobs. They aren't starting new companies. They aren't innovating. They aren't expanding their companies. And for entrepreneurs, this lack of real capital is driving away job creation, innovation, and growth. There's less real money around to invest in new profitable ventures. As pointed out recently in the media, there is a capital drain happening in Canada. Money is flying to where it is treated more fairly from a tax policy perspective. Meanwhile, newer, aspiring entrepreneurs lack the available capital and investment, and they too themselves are leaving Canada. When a new project wants to get off the ground or a new business venture wants to get started, they heavily rely on the investors who drive their capital to create a return for themselves, but the entrepreneurs also get a chance to expand, to do something, to fill purpose, to serve the economy. Meanwhile, we have a lot of people who are projecting wealth, borrowing against these overpriced homes to fund an extravagant lifestyle. And projecting a lavish lifestyle is the same thing as the illusion of prosperity driven by bad fiscal and monetary policy by the government. The truth is, many Canadians aren't wealthy because of their business acumen. They're not wealthy because they decided to take risks and invest. Rather, they became wealthy just by being in the right generation, born at the right time, enjoying an almost unending prosperity cycle driven by monetary inflation and bad government policy. The overwhelming majority in the boomer generation is tied up in real estate, and they are seemingly cash poor for the most part. This dynamic mirrors what Austrian economist Murray Rothbard warned about many years ago. When governments and central banks inflate the money supply, they create the illusion of prosperity. It's fake. It's not built on real wealth, real savings, or real value created in the economy. And it cannot last. Rothbard put it bluntly: inflation is a process by which the government creates money out of thin air. It creates the illusion of prosperity, but it squanders real capital. And the Canadian business climate seems to reflect this perfectly. Investors have the illusion of being prosperous, but they're cash poor and house rich. Just like entrepreneurs chasing central bank-led booms in the boom and bust cycle. So let's take a look at this more deeply and take a look at it from a GDP per capita perspective. Back in 2015, Canada's GDP per capita was roughly equal to the United States, but over the last decade, the US has surged ahead while Canada has relatively flatlined. Here are the real numbers. In 2023, the US GDP per capita was about $66,300 per person. Canada, meanwhile, was only $44,000 USD per person. That's almost a 50% gap. And this gap just isn't some abstract number. It just means that Canadian entrepreneurs are working with less resources, lower investment, and lower productivity growth. Meanwhile, American entrepreneurs are snapping up opportunities, attracting capital, and driving higher prosperity. In a healthy economy, new investment capital gets channeled into new innovation, new resources, and expansion. But central banking destroys and distorts this. And this is the basic premise. Easy money flows into speculation and chases bubble returns, typically into real estate. With easy money policies, real estate seems to be a no-brainer, where investing with an entrepreneur in a new business venture seems fraught with risk. Again, we turn to Rothbard, who wrote a warning to us many years ago. By flooding the market with money, central banks distort prices and encourage wasteful investment, often ending in a crisis. And this distortion just doesn't hit the new tech market. It hurts all small businesses. It doesn't matter what the industry, whether it's construction, the hospitality industry, or any industry. Entrepreneurs need capital to grow their companies. Instead of a vibrant economy that's ripe for new businesses, Canada seems to have stalled. Not only do we have less investment running around inside our country, but it seems to be fleeing at a rapid pace. And we seem to be living in a culture where appearances matter more than producing something. Now, let's compare this with the United States. In states like Florida, Texas, and Tennessee, incomes are higher, taxes are lower, and real estate is affordable. And that means that investors actually have cash and a higher cultural appetite to take risk. They have liquidity. They're willing to write checks, take new risks, and back new ventures. This shift in cultural differences seems to have propelled the United States well beyond where Canada seems to be stuck. But there's another factor that makes the US much more prosperous over the last decade than Canada. The United States, despite some of its legislative flaws, tends to have less government interference in the free markets than in Canada. In the US, entrepreneurs face less regulations, lower taxes, and a competitive labor and energy market. For example, the US corporate tax rate is flat, leaving higher profits to be reinvested back in the business. This creates an incentive for entrepreneurs to start and scale their businesses. Now, Canada, by contrast, layers on more regulations, higher taxes, and bureaucratic barriers to do business. In Canada, we have a progressive income tax in corporations. It's a two-tiered system on active income for Canadian-controlled private corporations and a very punitive rate of tax for passive income. Not only does this keep less money in people's pockets, but there's a higher rate of personal tax, so even individuals have less money to invest. For small business and startups, this difference can be the difference between dying and thriving, or never launching at all. Again, we turn to Rothbard, who reminded us, every government interference in the market obscures and distorts the signals entrepreneurs rely on to coordinate production with consumer demand. This increased regulatory burden doubles down on the bad monetary policy we have in Canada. Instead of flowing into productive ventures, it's eaten up by compliance costs, tax drains, and distorted incentives. In the US, which is far from perfect, I'll admit, still gives entrepreneurs more breathing room to create prosperity. Now, Austrian economics taught us a long time ago between real and fake capital. Here's the premise of the framework in simple terms. In a free market with sound money, capital is genuine. It comes from real savings, real production, and real discipline. But under central banking, much of that capital is fake. It only exists in paper, driving up house values or creating credit out of thin air. Rothbard said it best. Capital cannot be conjured out of thin air. Real wealth must be created by saving and producing, not by inflating. And that's why, from coast to coast, entrepreneurs in Canada are struggling to raise capital. They're chasing phantom wealth. So when we ask the question about why Canada's GDP has flatlined and America is surging, the answer is clear. We've substituted real entrepreneurial growth for an illusion of prosperity, based on real estate speculation and central bank money expansion policies. The result? Fewer startups, less investment, and lower productivity. And that is a widening gap between us and our American neighbors. In my opinion, it's not that Canada lacks an entrepreneurial spirit. The problem is our capital system. Central banking, inflates asset bubbles. And in Canada, a lot of that speculation has gone into the real estate market. To be sure, the US Federal Reserve has also inflated their supply of money. But because the US is the global denominated dollar for trade, they've avoided a lot of the domestic inflation that Canada is currently suffering from. And to that point, both in Canada and the US, government interference distorts markets. Now you put these two things together and they starve entrepreneurs of real opportunities. So if Vancouver wants a thriving startup ecosystem, and if Canada wants to close the GDP per capita gap with the US, we have to get rid of some of our illusions. We need sound money, we need less interference in the market, and we need real savings, real investment, and through better tax policy, the ability to have more capital formation. Because projecting wealth, whether through luxury real estate or central banking financial statements, is not real prosperity. It's a mirage. So let's turn to Murray Rothbard, who provided a solution. Sound money is the necessary foundation for a free and prosperous society. And until Canada learns that, we're going to be stuck in stagnation. If you found this video helpful on your journey of learning economics, financial literacy, history, politics, and philosophy, hit subscribe and stay tuned for more upcoming videos.